On your television screen, Hollywood blockbusters like Bad Boys or End of Watch depict the police department as the ultimate symbol of duty, heroism, and public order. You see chrome-plated badges flashing under streetlights, high-speed tactical pursuits, and brave officers putting their lives on the line to shield quiet suburban neighborhoods from chaos. Everyday Americans are conditioned to view public safety through a moral lens, a non-negotiable government service funded by civic duty. Suburban homeowners willingly swallow $12,000 annual property tax bills, convincing themselves that every dollar directly funds that shiny patrol car idling at the end of their cul-de-sac. But turn off the Hollywood cameras, mute the sirens, strip away the moral armor, the chrome badges, and the patriotic rhetoric. What is a police department at its bare structural core? It is a business. It is a hyper-monopolized, capital-intensive service enterprise operating in the public sector. And under the cold, unfeeling light of financial forensics, it is one of the most toxic, illiquid, and structurally fragile cash-bleeding machines ever designed by modern bureaucracy. Look at the raw audited balance sheets. $6 billion. That is the massive annual operating budget of the New York City Police Department, a figure larger than the entire military defense budget of sovereign nations like Ireland or New Zealand. 84.7%. That is the exact proportion of fixed operating costs locked permanently in officer salaries, guaranteed lifelong pensions, and healthcare benefits in Los Angeles, transforming the department into a concrete block of financial rigidity that cannot be restructured. And $110 million. That is the liquid cash drained from NYC's general fund in a single year, solely to settle civil rights misconduct lawsuits and brutality claims. It is a bizarre, mathematically absurd business equation, a service enterprise where labor costs swallow nearly 85% of all revenue, where chronic overtime liabilities eat through reserve funds like acid, and where a single 5-second mistake made by an employee on a dark street corner can vaporize a municipality's cash reserves for the next 20 years. This is not a story about catching criminals. This is a forensic financial autopsy of an entity where violence is legally monopolized, and your illusion of suburban safety is priced down to the exact cent. On paper, it looks like an automated public safety engine protecting property values. In reality, it's a meticulously engineered liquidity trap. To understand how this financial trap springs shut, consider Jonathan Miller, the newly appointed city manager of Fairview, a rapidly expanding suburban municipality on the outer ring of the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex. Fairview had been a quiet bedroom community, but the suburban boom hit. Gated subdivisions sprouted overnight, strip malls filled with high-end grocery stores, and corporate executives relocated, paying top-dollar property taxes. With rapid expansion came a rising demand for security. Historically, Fairview contracted its public safety out to the county sheriff's office. But Jonathan, looking at his city's expanding balance sheet, fell into the ultimate gross margin illusion. The sheriff's contract was costing Fairview $4,200,000 a year, and the city council was complaining about slow response times. Jonathan ran a preliminary calculation. If we collect $40 million a year in property taxes, why not pay a third-party vendor $4.2 million? Why not build, own, and operate our own municipal police department? We can control the workforce, generate revenue through traffic enforcement, boost local property values, and keep the cash within our municipal border. It sounded brilliant, the classic corporate insourcing strategy. But Jonathan was about to discover the brutal reality of public safety capital expenditures. Firmly, you cannot start a police department by renting an office suite and putting magnetic decals on a few leased sedans. The barrier to entry in public safety is astronomical. First, Jonathan confronted facility infrastructure. Under federal standards, specifically the FBI's CJIS security mandates, a police station requires reinforced concrete construction at $350 per square foot, blast-resistant glass, secure armories, climate-controlled digital evidence vaults, and isolated temporary detention cells. The sticker price for Fairview's modest 20,000 square foot facility? $18.5 million in upfront municipal construction bonds, carrying a 4.2% annual interest rate. Next came the fleet. A retail Ford Explorer bought off a dealership lot for $45,000 is completely useless to a law enforcement agency. To turn it into a police interceptor, Jonathan had to pay an additional $33,500 per vehicle for tactical upfitting, heavy-duty cooling systems, level 3 ballistic door panels at $2,200 a pair, center console tough books at $3,600, specialized wiring harnesses, and automated shotgun lock mounts. For a modest fleet of 25 patrol units, the fleet line item alone consumed $1,962,000. Then came individual gear. Class A uniforms, Level 3A body armor at $1,100 per vest, Glock 17 sidearms, tasers at $1,400 per unit, encrypted digital radios at $4,200 each, and body-worn cameras. Gear costs totaled $17,800 per officer before they even stepped onto the pavement. Total CapEx before a single patrol was conducted, exactly $22,410,000. Yet capital was not the most lethal barrier to entry. Administrative and regulatory delays were. To legally function, Fairview PD needed an originating agency identifier code issued directly by the FBI. Without an ORI code, a police department is legally invisible. It cannot access the National Crime Information Center, run fingerprint checks, or verify driver's licenses. The FBI background vetting, IT network security audit, and clearance process took 11 agonizing months. For nearly a full year, Jonathan's $22 million CapEx machine sat frozen. Frustrated, Fairview was paying $78,750 a month in bond debt service, lease fees on idling patrol cars, and full salaries, $62,000 a month, to a recruited chief of police and command staff who could not legally make a single arrest. It was a masterclass in buried opportunity costs. Over $1,500,000 in liquid capital suffocated beneath federal bureaucracy before day one. When Fairview PD finally cut the ribbon, Jonathan thought the financial worst was behind him. In reality, he had just stepped into the operational OpEx meat grinder. In private sector corporate finance, a healthy business balances its operating expenses across raw materials, software, and workforce. But in the P&L statement of a police department, almost every single line item is eclipsed by one giant monolith: fixed personnel costs. In major municipal departments like Los Angeles, out of a $2.13 billion operating budget, exactly 84.7% goes directly to officer salaries, overtime, healthcare, and pensions. In smaller suburban departments like Fairview, that number frequently touches 87.6%. Why is this dangerous? Because personnel costs in the public sector are hard fixed costs. Due to powerful police union contracts and civil service protections, a city manager cannot easily lay off officers or alter benefit packages when tax revenues dip. Near 88 cents of every dollar flowing out of the city treasury is locked in concrete, leaving a fragile 12.4% margin to pay for everything else: fuel at $44,000 a month, fleet maintenance, weapon recertification, and technology. And speaking of technology, Jonathan immediately slammed into the cloud data trap. Every officer wears a body-worn camera, and every patrol vehicle carries a dash cam. A tiny 50-officer department like Fairview PD generates roughly 7.5 terabytes of video footage every single month. By law, this video footage must be maintained in secure, CGIS-compliant cloud environments with immutable audit trails. Vendors like Axon Enterprise provide the cameras at a nominal cost, but they monetize through long-term cloud storage contracts like Evidence.com. Initially, Jonathan budgeted $24,000 a year for digital evidence storage, but as historical footage accumulated, required by state laws to be held for 3 to 7 years for misdemeanors and indefinitely for felonies, Fairview's cloud storage bill skyrocketed to $218,000 annually by year 3. It was a zombie subscription trap at the enterprise level, a recurring software cost growing at 32% annually that the city could legally never cancel. Yet cloud storage was merely a paper cut compared to the two terminal hemorrhages of police finance: overtime addiction and civil misconduct liability. In corporate management, overtime handles temporary demand spikes. In a police department, overtime is a chronic structural disease. Because crime does not adhere to an 8-hour shift, an officer making an arrest at 3:30 p.m. on a shift ending at 4 p.m. cannot simply clock out. They must process the suspect and log evidence, pushing them into time-and-a-half pay at $67 an hour. If subpoenaed to testify in court the following morning during off hours, the city pays a mandatory minimum 4-hour overtime block, $268, even if the hearing takes 5 minutes. Overtime routinely blows past budget projections by 28.4%, and in major cities like New York, NYPD overtime regularly surges past $800 million a year. Then came the terminal blow for Jonathan's balance sheet, the misconduct settlement black hole. 18 months into Fairview PD's operation, a veteran officer misread a situation during a midnight traffic stop, panicked, and shot an unarmed motorist, leaving him permanently paralyzed. The civil lawsuit was swift and devastating. The jury returned an $11.8 million verdict against Fairview for civil rights violations under Section 1983. Fairview's total municipal reserve fund was only $3.9 million, and their general liability policy refused full coverage due to policy exclusions. Jonathan was forced to utilize a dark mechanism of American municipal finance, municipal judgment bonds. Fairview had to go to Wall Street investment bankers and issue $12 million in specialized judgment bonds just to pay off the court judgment and legal fees, borrowing at a 6.8% interest rate spread over 20 years. The ultimate tragedy? The suburban taxpayers of Fairview, who had bought homes believing a local police department would protect their property values, were now hit with a special property tax assessment of $420 per household per year. They were paying interest to Wall Street bondholders for 2 decades, solely to cover the liquid liability of a 5-second mistake made by an officer on a dark highway. At this point, a rational analyst must ask a fundamental question. If a police department is a hyper-rigid cost center burdened with $78,000 patrol cars, exponential cloud storage fees, uncontrollable overtime, and nuclear legal liabilities, how do these organizations survive? Why don't they go bankrupt every single quarter? The answer lies in understanding the operational split between the loss leader and the hidden monetization engines. In retail economics, a supermarket sells milk at a loss leader, just to get consumers through the front doors where they buy high-margin items. A municipal police department operates on the exact same structural blueprint. The loss leader of public safety is the 911 emergency response and patrol system. When a citizen calls 911 because an intruder is on their porch, officers race to the scene in an $80,000 vehicle. That service consumes 62% of the department's labor, fuel, and capital assets, yet generates precisely $0 in direct revenue. It is a pure, cash-bleeding public good. To survive the financial drain of the 911 loss leader, law enforcement agencies deploy 3 hidden, high-margin monetization engines. Monetization engine number 1, off-duty private contracting or special detail fees. Consider a private real estate developer building a $50 million commercial tower, a bank moving cash, or a stadium hosting a massive concert. Corporations need state-sanctioned police power. Private corporations contract directly with the police department, paying $75 to $140 per hour per officer. The officer gets paid an off-duty rate of $60 an hour, but the police department assesses a mandatory administrative fee, typically 18 to 25% on the total contract value. That admin fee is virtually 100% pure profit margin, using equipment already fully subsidized by taxpayer dollars. In a mid-sized department, this generates $300,000 to $500,000 a year in off-budget cash flow. Monetization engine number 2, traffic fine arbitrage and speed traps. Small to mid-sized suburban municipalities turn traffic enforcement into an explicit corporate revenue model. Towns strategically situated along highways engineer speed traps, abruptly dropping speed limits from 65 miles per hour down to 35 miles per hour across a 200-yard stretch, and positioning patrol units 24/7. In places like Waldo, Florida, or Lindale, Ohio, traffic fines, court fees, and ticket surcharges historically accounted for up to 84% of the municipality's total operating budget. A single officer writing 25 tickets a day at $215 per violation generates $1,397,000 in gross annual revenue, turning a $60,000 salary into an 1,800% return on labor investment. Monetization engine number 3, civil asset forfeiture. Under federal and state civil asset forfeiture laws, specifically through programs like the Department of Justice's Equitable Sharing Program, police officers have the legal authority to seize cash, luxury vehicles, real estate, and physical property suspected of being connected to criminal activity. The legal action is filed against the property itself, not the person, meaning police do not need to convict or even formally charge the owner with a crime. To reclaim property, the owner must hire expensive legal counsel costing thousands in retainer fees, often exceeding the value of the seized assets. Up to 80% of the net proceeds of liquidated seized assets flow directly back to the seizing agency. According to data published by the Institute for Justice, federal agencies and local partners seized over $68 billion from citizens through this mechanism over a 20-year period. This capital does not pass through the City Council's budget approval process, sitting in specialized sheriff's discretionary funds used to purchase military-grade equipment like $300,000 MRAP armored vehicles and Stingray cell site simulators. By combining special detail admin fees, traffic fine arbitrage, and civil asset forfeiture, public safety entities build a shadow ecosystem designed to self-fund their own organizational expansion. To see what happens when these monetization engines fail to cover the structural bleed, look at the greatest municipal bankruptcy in California history, the forensic autopsy of Vallejo, California. In May 2008, the city of Vallejo filed for Chapter 9 bankruptcy protection, sending shockwaves through the multi-trillion-dollar municipal bond market. The collapse was a slow-motion financial execution driven entirely by public safety labor contracts. Over 2 decades of booming real estate, police and fire unions negotiated extraordinary compensation packages. Officers could retire at age 50 with up to 90% of their highest single-year salary guaranteed for life, alongside fully paid medical insurance costing $2,400 per month per retiree. By 2007, the average Vallejo police officer was earning $171,000 in base salary and overtime, with total compensation packages exceeding $250,000 annually. Public safety personnel costs swelled to consume an astonishing 74% of Vallejo's entire $58 million general fund budget. When the 2008 subprime mortgage crisis hit, Vallejo's residential property values plummeted by 46% and property tax revenues dropped by over 34% in less than 18 months. A standard commercial enterprise slashes payroll during a revenue drop, but Vallejo couldn't. Police union contracts contained strict minimum staffing clauses of 94 active officers and ironclad pension guarantees. The labor costs were a fixed concrete wall of $43 million, while tax revenue dropped to $38 million. The city went completely insolvent, running an immediate $5 million cash deficit. To survive Chapter 9 bankruptcy, Vallejo stripped its community to the bone, slashing the police force from 158 officers down to 46, closing 3 out of 8 fire stations, stopping road repairs, and turning off 1/3 of all streetlights. Crime rates soared, 911 response times lengthened to over 45 minutes, and property values stayed depressed for over a decade. Vallejo proved that an unmanaged police budget is an apex predator capable of consuming the entire city that spawned it. How do modern, financially sophisticated city managers break this cycle and restructure an entity bound by 85% fixed labor costs? Through 3 structural financial reforms. First, regional consolidation and shared infrastructure. Smart municipalities are executing interlocal contracting agreements rather than dropping $22 million in CapEx to build standalone facilities. Small towns dissolve their municipal departments and contract services from the county sheriff's office or form a regional police authority. Under a regional model, 4 or 5 small municipalities share the massive CapEx costs of dispatch centers, SWAT teams, and evidence vaults. The individual city pays a predictable fixed annual contract fee, shifting unpredictable liabilities onto the larger regional entity and cutting total public safety expenditures by 25 to 30%. Second, aggressive civilianization. For decades, departments used sworn officers, costing $130,000 a year in salary and pension liabilities for mundane administrative tasks like writing parking tickets and managing evidence rooms. Restructuring requires replacing sworn officers with unsworn civilian specialists for nonviolent duties. A civilian community service officer costs the city $48,000 a year in total compensation, carries 0 lifetime pension liability, and requires no expensive tactical gear. Shifting 35% of non-emergency calls to civilian personnel cuts operational labor costs by up to 32%. Third, self-insurance risk pools and algorithmic loss control. Modern cities are joining intergovernmental risk pools to pool their liquid capital into a shared member-owned risk pool covering up to $10 million per occurrence. These risk pools enforce strict algorithmic loss control. If a specific officer accumulates multiple citizen complaints or demonstrates high-risk behavior during vehicle pursuits, the risk pool's actuaries step in to mandate retraining, reassignment, or termination. If the city refuses, the risk pool raises premiums by 50% or drops coverage entirely, forcing municipalities to eliminate high-risk personnel before they generate multi-million-dollar legal liabilities. The economics of owning a police department offer a profound lesson that directly impacts how you evaluate risk as an investor or homeowner. Before you purchase commercial real estate, buy a home in a master-planned suburb, or purchase municipal bonds, never merely look at the manicured lawns or glossy marketing brochures. Look at the city's comprehensive annual financial report. Examine the balance sheet and the ratio of public safety spending relative to the general fund. If police labor costs and unfunded pension liabilities exceed 65% of total revenues, you're looking at a ticking financial time bomb. When the next macroeconomic downturn hits, that city will have only two choices: either drastically hike your property taxes by 20 to 40% to fund historical cop pensions, or cut basic municipal services to the bone, watching your real estate value implode just like Vallejo. In the world of public safety, civic pride and the illusion of security are emotional intangibles. Cold, hard cash is the only tangible fuel that keeps the lights on. And when the underlying financial equation breaks, order quickly gives way to arithmetic reality.